In the earlier lecture, I gave you a glimpse of how to open and write contents to the file. In this lecture, we will spend significant time discussing how to read contents from a text file. When reading from a file, you can use the read method to read the entire contents of a file into one variable. Or you could use the readLine method, like the name suggests, to read one line at a time. There are a few tiny details that you have to be aware of when using these two methods. I will use the numbers file to demonstrate this. If you think about it, the underlying contents of this text file are 1/n, 2/n, so on till 5. You might wonder, how does Python know it hit the end of the file? No matter what, at the end of the file, you would not have any character. In other words, Python would hit an empty character, which you have seen in the course already. Empty character is represented by empty quotes. All right, let me run this program and see what gets displayed. I'm starting a connection to the file using the file variable, which would point to a file object that accesses the text file. Now I'm invoking the read method on the file object and assigning the contents to this variable. Now that we are done processing the file and have no plans to do anything with it, it is time to close the connection. I cannot emphasize this enough. You always have to close the connections to files when you're done. All right, the print statement now displays the contents of the file as is. Basically, this program read all the contents from the text file and printed it as is. Now I will modify this program by reading it line by line. By looking at the program, you might already be wondering that this is not an efficient way of reading contents from the file, right? This code is definitely not generic, as you may not exactly know how many lines are present in the text file ahead of time. We shall discuss an improved version of this code shortly, which involves loops, but for now, let us walk through this code. Clearly, each line of the code that invokes readLine method on the file object will read a single line from the file. When I try to print it right away, you see that an extra new line character is being added, which might not be desirable. It so happens that you can strip characters away from a string using few methods, which we shall be covering in depth when we get to the chapter on strings. But for now, know that rstrip method strips off trailing spaces on the right side of a string. To explicitly ask Python to strip away the new line character, we have to send it as an input argument to the rstrip method. With that, let me rewrite the program adding rstrip method to the string variables. Now if I run it, it displays the contents as expected. All right, time to talk about efficient way of reading lines one by one from a file. My top choice is a for loop because the code is very intuitive. You can write for line in file variable, and the iterator variable line now has the first line of the file. You can choose to do anything with it in the for loop code. In the next iteration, it will be the next line, and so on and so forth. The for loop will stop executing when all the lines are read from the file. Let's say I update the numbers file with 5 more numbers and read the contents using for loop. It would successfully display all the lines. Now if we like to do the same using while loop, it requires the knowledge that the end of the file is an empty string. So we start out with reading first line. While line not equals to empty string, you keep repeating the same. When you hit the end of the file, that is when the while loop condition is not satisfied and it breaks out of the loop. Now let's say I uploaded the scores of all of your exams into a text file and want to compute the class average for the exam. Here, I'm not just displaying the contents, but rather processing them numerically. When I read the contents from the file, they will be in string format. It is my responsibility to convert it to numerical format and do the necessary processing. So I read the line which contains one score. I'm adding it to the running total in the loop and also keeping track of the number of scores. After the loop finishes executing, I will display the average of the exam score. The textbook has really good examples on how to search for a record, modify a record, and delete a record from the text file. I highly recommend that you read through all the examples given in the textbook.